Hello everybody and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Global Supply Chain Practice Head for Morgan Phillips Executive Search. Today I'm happy to have Blake Larson, Head and MD International for Lalamove. Founded in 2013 as EasyVan in Hong Kong, Lalamove is the leading same-day delivery platform present in 129 cities in 9 countries across Asia. Through its mobile and desktop platform, Lalamove connects customers with professional van, motorcycle, lorry and truck drivers. Some of their corporate clients include IKEA, Line and Google. They raised so far a total of $161 million in funding over 6 rounds, and the latest funding came from a Series C of $100 million on October 11, 2017, which means the company is now valued at more than $1 billion. Short intro about Blake. He has worked across 4 continents, mostly in the retail and technology sector. He has helped lead the growth of Lalamove from 1 city in Southeast Asia to 8, has also been involved in the Series A funding of $10 million, has launched Easy Taxi app funded by Rocket Internet in Hong Kong, Singapore, Mumbai and Jakarta in the previous role, and also before that he has co-founded and managed Aircrew Club, which was like Group 1 for airline employees, and expanded it across 6 continents and 13 cities. Also, he has some very interesting stories to share, including how after his MBA, he spent his first 8 weeks for Rocket Internet in Hong Kong, standing outside petrol stations, handing out flyers to taxi drivers. So we'll find out more about that. But before, Blake, a warm welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start maybe with a story about you in Hong Kong, standing outside petrol stations. How did that come about?
So it was literally the day I arrived to Hong Kong, and my first day on the job for Rocket Internet's Easy Taxi. So we were launching an Uber style or a Grab style taxi application in Hong Kong. The global CEO from Brazil was in town for my first 4 hours of my job. He handed me a piece of paper with 10 questions, and he goes, go solve the business, go start it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, the questions are there, just go out there and do it. And so I didn't know what else to do except to go get close to our customers. And to do that, we first had to have our taxi drivers on the platform. So literally, I don't speak any Cantonese. It's the first time I lived in Hong Kong. The first day I was in Hong Kong, and here I am printing flyers and going out in the 35-degree heat, handing out flyer after flyer to thousands and thousands of taxi drivers over the next 8 weeks.
Oh wow, that's quite an interesting start to your Asian journey, yeah.
Yeah, it was quite crazy, and I think But you know what it showed me is that there's a lot of glamour around startups and what they are and what they're not, but actually you don't know until you try, and you don't know until you go face your customer. Yeah. And so to see the faces of the local Cantonese taxi drivers when, this white guy who doesn't speak Cantonese is standing outside knocking on their windows and filling up with, they're filling up with petrol. They obviously rolled down their window because of the novelty of it, but it was the best way to kind of get my fingers into the business right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very interesting story also because if we think about the story of Grab is another taxi app, right, that started in Southeast Asia, and the founder of Grab, which is Anthony Tan, he did the same, but in Malaysia, in a different geography, but exactly the same. Because the principle, as you rightfully said, is you need to be close to your customers, right, or to your users.
Yes.
So interesting story. So tell us a little bit about Lalamove, right? What it is for the listeners that don't know, how exactly it works and how does it add value to people?
Sure. So Lalamove uses a crowd sourced model as well, kind of like the taxi apps, but instead of moving people, we're moving things. So our focus is really and exclusively on hyper-local deliveries. So we're not doing between cities, we're not doing international, we're really focusing on first and last mile deliveries in the largest cities across Asia, and we use a crowdsourced model to do this.
Yes. Okay, so it's specifically only in intracity, right? So intracity, last mile delivery,
exactly,
matching available space in lorries, in vans with the need.
Exactly. Okay. So the local delivery space is very, very fragmented, and actually a lot of the local logistic companies don't even own their own assets. And they're working with independent contractors anyway, right? So basically, we're taking all of this fragmented supply pool, putting it on a mobile platform to drive the efficiency of our drivers. But because of the model and the density of these drivers, our core competitive advantage really is how fast we're able to do delivery relative to traditional means of delivery.
And so you're the MD and head of international, right? So what's your role as in that capacity at Lalamove?
Right. So we're across 129 cities right now across Asia, and that's split between mainland China and outside of mainland China. So my role is actually the business outside of mainland China. That includes all of our city operations, our product team, our tech team, our finance, all the shared services, et cetera. So I'm running our business across the SEA region.
And how different is it to operate across different cities, across different countries? Because I imagine also from a last mile logistics center that would differ from the consumer's behavior that would differ. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think this is depending on who you're talking to about this question, right? So people talk about the opportunity in Southeast Asia, 620 million, 650 million people. And if you're not really familiar with it, you just look at that number and you look at growth rates of anywhere from 5 to 10% in all of these countries for the GDP, and you say, wow, that's a really, really big opportunity. But when you actually start digging into the details, the nuances across the countries, across the cultures and everything really, really make the region an opportunity, but a huge, huge challenge to operate effectively. And I think for us specifically, I like to, simplify it into like the customer's expectations in Singapore versus like Manila, because we're in both markets, right? And for example, in Singapore, if you told the customer, hey, I will deliver your goods, today, and I promise I won't steal them, they would laugh at you.
Yes.
Because Singapore is one of the most secure, safest cities. Traffic is generally pretty good compared to the mega cities across Southeast Asia because it's not that big. The infrastructure is very strong. But yet that value proposition of, hey, I'll deliver it to you in the next couple hours, and I promise your goods will actually show up in Manila is very, very strong because the local offering in that market is proven to be quite unreliable of the goods even showing up. So we've really had to adapt to the local cultures and also like the infrastructure challenges or lack thereof in competing markets. And so Singapore and Manila, again, I think these are really two extreme examples of where the customer's expectations on what fast means, what reliable means, what secure means are really, really different.
And I wanted to ask you actually, because I know that I think in certain markets and specifically in Hong Kong, where also your density is larger, you have the promise of 55 minutes delivery time?
So actually, if you look at our average delivery time across the region, and this actually, I'll put China into this, our average delivery time from order to drop off is 55 minutes. So
that's impressive.
It's really, really quick. And the reason we can do this is because the level of driver density we have. So across the region, we have over 2 million registered drivers on our platform. Right. So I believe the statistic was the largest logistics fleet in the world, and this is a few years ago, was the United States Postal Service, and they had something like 250,000 vehicles. So after 4.5 years, we have over 2 million registered drivers on our platform. So this allows us to have very, very high driver density, which shortens the distance to the pickup location. So that's where most of the savings are. And a lot of this is idle capacity anyway. So you're actually bringing more business to these independent contractors that otherwise maybe we're doing 1-2 orders a day. But because of the density of our orders and the density of the drivers and the quicker turnaround, we're actually helping the drivers be a lot more efficient as well.
Yes. No, but that's fantastic. I didn't know this statistic, because also I'm thinking from coming back to the problem with the traffic, right? Because let's take in Southeast Asia, I think Manila and Jakarta are probably the most the craziest in terms of traffic,
yes.
Aren't they, right? So if you indeed have the driver, I'm just thinking out loud, right? But if you have the driver in the same neighborhood and they can pick it up, right, and then still 55 minutes. I would doubt they would do that in 55 minutes in Manila and in Jakarta, but still.
It's a bit longer, but actually I was looking at the number this morning, and our average arrival time, right, from the time a driver accepts an order to the time he arrives in Manila is 9 minutes. And if anybody who knows Manila, the expansiveness of this city is quite
fast,
it's huge. So it really speaks volumes on like the level of density of the drivers that we have in the market.
Yeah.
And also, I guess the caveat on this too, for people that like don't know Southeast Asia, is that the types of vehicles that you do delivery with is quite vast here, right? So everything from motorcycles to cars to vans to 10-foot lorry, 14-foot lorry, et cetera. All the local delivery is done by so many different means and different types of vehicles that obviously the arrival time and delivery time is impacted in the cities that have the worst traffic based on the type of vehicle that they need to do the delivery.
Yes. And how do you pay the technical question?
Yeah.
But how do you pay the drivers? How do the drivers get paid in a sense of, well, is there a flat fee? Is there
right? No. So actually, our pricing model is a base price plus a per kilometer price based on the vehicle type, right? So all we do is a revenue share model with them. The driver keeps 80 to 85% of every order, and we take 15 to 20% of that.
Okay, so it's very similar to Uber.
It's quite similar. Okay. Yeah.
Which was the fastest growing country for you in Southeast Asia, and maybe some of the key lessons for you in growing the business there?
Yeah, sure. So each city, one thing I've learned through launching many cities is that the growth trajectory is not predicated at all on your past performance in other cities. And a lot of it is because of the localization or the local dynamic of what's happening from a competitive standpoint. But recently we've launched Vietnam and Philippines. So we launched Ho Chi Minh and Manila. And so right now, after about 15 months, Manila is growing unbelievably, but maybe the first 4 or 5 months it was a little bit slower. Whereas Ho Chi Minh, from the very first day, grew very, very, very quickly. And a lot of it has to do with both the experience that customers are used to in that market. So is the basic service level good, high or not? And then also the abundance of supply. So these are two markets where the supply is very, very abundant, and actually the general level of service that people are used to getting from delivery providers is not that high. So we've seen tremendous success in these two markets.
Because basically, so if I am to summarize, the pain points is that, okay, they have pretty bad delivery service or existing, and then you come in and fill up that gap. And when you say that you're growing, it's a good growth. I mean, can you give us some specifics, like how big is your growth?
I mean, we can easily range anywhere from 20 to 50% month-on-month growth for the first 2 years.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. That's
so. And I think something that's important and that's quite close to our ethos as a company is we actually very much believe in sustainable growth too. So I think we have a very different model than a lot of startups that raise a lot of capital, primarily because of the types of customers that we serve, and most of them are SMEs, actually. I mean, we do work at the enterprise. We do some consumer delivery, like C2C delivery, but primarily it's SMEs. And what we found really early on is that these clients really value trust, reliability, and consistency, even over free. I mean, they'll try you for free, for sure. But we found that actually subsidizing heavily in this market is not an effective way to retain customers, maybe to get them initially, but they really value your dependability much more so than just the monetary part, which isn't necessarily true in some of the consumer-driven, internet companies, I would say.
Mm. And do you find yourself, because I know that, for example, for China, and we will not name it, but there is a pretty strong competitor that you have, but do you find that you have a strong competition in Southeast Asia? Is there one player that because I also don't know, actually.
Yeah, I would say that there's very few, if none, regional companies doing what we're doing in Southeast Asia. I would say we have a lot of tangential competitors, right? So Grab and Gojek are doing a little bit more on the C2C delivery. Mm-hmm. But most of their customers is consumers, and so they're just moving it over. There's local competitors that have tried in all the different markets in Southeast Asia, but none of them have been able to scale across the region. And I think a lot of that is actually the challenges of managing a product and operational process in a way that is both scalable but also local enough to add value.
Mm-hmm. And with your latest round of funding, do you have? Obviously you have plans of expansion, but where do you see that happening? And do you plan to target more corporate clients or SME clients, or what's?
I think there's a couple areas that we're really investing in. One is definitely more talent, and a lot of that is going on the product and tech side, because product and tech allows you to scale much, much faster. So your ability to develop things and solutions quickly is paramount to future growth. So the second part we're going to be investing in is a lot of new services. So a lot of our clients are still doing primarily on-demand or same-hour delivery. We'll look to layer on a lot of other interesting same-day delivery options at a lower price. And then the third area we'll look is to continue to further open new cities in Southeast Asia. So we're across all the major cities at this point in Southeast Asia, but we'll look to do, I guess, if Southeast Asia has second and third tier cities, we're still seeing opportunities in there. So we'll look to do that in the coming several months.
Got it. Have you so-called failed in any city? I mean, has it not quite picked up the way that you wanted it?
Yeah. So again, I think failure is somewhat relative, but we haven't closed a city yet. And I would say that, most of the time we believe there's an opportunity for delivery everywhere in Southeast Asia right now and China. It's just whether you can adapt quick enough to be relevant in that market. So one of the examples, though, where we really had a challenge is our first city was Hong Kong. And then what we did is about 5 months after we launched Hong Kong, we came to Singapore. And so we used the same product. We used the same type of marketing, the same type of branding. We said, hey, copy, paste. And then we got on the ground, and it didn't take off. Because actually how people interact with delivery in Hong Kong is actually unique to anywhere in the world, from what I found so far, in the sense that there was already a dispatch system for delivery in Hong Kong that worked like traditional taxi operators, where you would call a call center and a delivery guy would come up. So for us, all we did was digitize this and make it more effective. But actually in Singapore, there's a lot more self-ownership of the SMEs of their vehicles, because they like to have the control of the quality. But actually this doesn't scale very well as their business grows, right? So actually we had to really come in, and after a few months where growth was there, but not at all up to our expectations, we had to really spend a lot of time with our customers and understand that the pain points in Singapore to doing delivery were quite different than Hong Kong. And so I think we've adapted fairly well, but I mean, I'm sure there's still work left to do.
And what would you say, to be a bit more specific, what would you say that there were for Singapore, let's take this example, that was some of the, because I hear it's a recurring theme, right? Be local, localize the business model, be close to your consumers, and see what's the patterns and what do they appreciate. So, for example, in Singapore, what do the people in Singapore care about?
They care a lot more about service quality than in Hong Kong. Where in Hong Kong, it's like, get it to me now, just like the city. Get it to me now, give it to me. Service is like a secondary thought to speed and efficiency. In Singapore, it's definitely much like from a customer standpoint, where it's the SME or the final customer receiving it, the service level, the expectation is much, much higher.
Yeah, very interesting. And do you think that in terms of same-day delivery, do you think that it has the potential to become a standard delivery option for the masses? Or do you think it will remain an option just for the limited number of impatient consumers with deep pockets, specifically in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it will become a standard offering for logistic companies to compete effectively in the mid to long term. They will have to offer it. Whether it's right for every customer, that's actually not for, I believe, the companies to decide. Your job is actually to give the customer choice and provide it at a price that is valuable to them. So, I mean, certain goods, you definitely want them same day. Like, there's a sense of urgency. But if you can deliver it next day or 2 days or 3 days at, a fraction of the cost, like, I think that will still be prevalent for the foreseeable future in Southeast Asia, because there is still a price sensitivity. And this will be particularly true for the e-commerce segment. So if you talk to any of the guys doing local delivery, whether it's the local logistic companies or the international or even us, like, delivery windows and times are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. There's no disputing this fact at all. So you're seeing the compression of delivery time cycles. And we believe that's like where the opportunity is, because with our model, the density that you can do to drive the efficiency is very, very hard for a lot of companies to replicate. But for sure, the customer is going to be more demanding of all of us in the coming years.
Yes, and I think, this model with the Amazon and Alibaba really driving the 2 hour, you name it, right? I mean, they're getting more and more people used to the idea of, okay, look, it happens really fast, and we're just kind of expecting it to happen really fast. And if you're not doing it, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And I'll give you there's a question in there, right? Because I had, as a consumer, I remember I had this situation I had some problems with mosquitoes in my house. I wanted to buy a mosquito lamp, right? Because, mosquitoes were biting me and my family. And then I had to wait, which was incredible at that point. I mean, it still is the same problem, actually, in Singapore, which is not such a big place, right? I had to wait 3 days for the delivery, right, from an own name, an e-commerce platform. I'm like, how is it possible, right? It's just one city. It's fairly, it's not a huge place. And I had to wait for 3 days. So basically, I just went physically to the shop and bought it and then brought it back home, right? So there's got to be a better way, right?
I think there definitely is. I mean, the traditional way is really to drive it based on what's best for the company, right, from a unit economic standpoint. But more and more customers and consumers like yourself want a personalized experience, right? And they want to be able to get the goods in the time they choose. Like I said, it's not always now, but when it's now, they want that choice. And so I believe that there's a huge opportunity, not just for ourselves, but just the general delivery market to adapt more from a customer first perspective. The literal logistics of figuring out how to do it in an economically feasible way is a challenge, but actually you can no longer hold on to traditional process for process sake, because that's how it always was done, and that's how you traditionally made profit. And so you're going to see companies that don't evolve their mindset, but also like their process when it comes to efficiency, really take a back seat to companies that are really willing to start with the customer and then work backwards into how the process fits the need of the customer.
Because this brings me to the question is there's a lot of actually problems in the last mile, right, sector, and this is a huge challenge for the e-commerce growth. I mean, how do you see the development currently and maybe in the future?
I mean, e-commerce is a tricky one, I would say, for all of the last mile delivery guys, whether people are doing it in-house or using a company like us or, any of the postal operators, whatever, because the likes of Alibaba and Amazon have spoiled everybody where they don't want to pay, right? They really don't want to pay. And because these are marketplaces, there's several other competitors on the marketplace selling a similar product at a similar price. And so those margins of the products are already very, very thin because it's competitive, right? So where are you going to find the margin to pay for the delivery if you're not charging the customer? But I guess this is where a lot of venture capital has actually stepped in private equity and kind of driven the growth at the expense of profit. And that's why these large e-commerce companies are able to grow. But from a delivery standpoint, you still have to find a way to make it economically feasible. Someone has to be paying for it. So it's either the customer, the person selling the product, or the financial investors. And right now, a lot of it's the financial investors, I would say, in the aim of driving more, market share. But yeah, for us delivery guys, it's to find out how to do this e-commerce at a reasonable price that the customers are willing to pay is definitely not an easy thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean it's not sustainable, is it, right? Because at some point somebody will have to stop funding it, right?
Yeah, I mean you have to find ways to make money, right? So again, I guess our take on this is it's important to get to a price point where people believe it's fair. It's and if we can't deliver that, we don't play in that space, to be honest, because we do believe that the unit economics have to work out. You need to create systems that create the right types of behaviors where it benefits everybody. And so, e-commerce, though, for whether it's the internet-driven companies or even the traditional logistic companies, there's this huge growth, but huge challenge to do it in a financially efficient way.
Yeah. And look, I mean, in terms of what we're seeing and what's happening truthfully on the market, actually some of these guys have had to create their own logistics arms because nobody's willing to do it for them, right? So if you look in Southeast Asia, you have Lazada, you have Zalora, you have Shopee. I mean, they're kind of creating their own logistics. The 3PLs are not doing it for them, right? Because there's no money in it. So it's big problems. And then you look at the postal operators, they're not quite geared up for e-commerce as well, right? So, it's anybody's guess how it's going to work out at the end.
Yeah, I mean, we have a client that's also using somebody else the other day, and they were shipping something from the UK to Singapore, and they were able to get it door to door for less than $5, right?
Wow.
And so when I was talking to them, I was like, and I won't say which company it was, but basically, I mean, there's a market share grab for a lot of the logistic guys out there, right? Because no one's they're losing lots of money on that. to serve, just so they can service that particular client. So yeah, it's really, really interesting the different approaches people are taking to, really chase the e-commerce growth right now. Because it's there, but to do it profitably is a whole nother story.
Yes. And one other question that I wanted to ask is in terms of the corporate clients that you have, right? So we talked a little bit about IKEA, we talked about Line. I think you have a partnership in Thailand.
Sure.
Do you plan to attract more of these guys? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so we're really building out a lot of our enterprise solutions right now, which a lot of that is both the delivery piece of it, but it's also helping them to manage their internal operations better and more efficiently. So giving them a lot of visibility into this data. Historically, we've actually purposely avoided the enterprise clients when we were much smaller because they're the guys with all the capital. Yet they want really long credit terms, which is like a death sentence for cash flow for startups. The sales cycle's long. Their strategies typically are to use multiple providers, so it's not like they're aligning their interests and your interests wholly. So when we were smaller, we found it to be a very high risk strategy. When you nail the big clients, it's very rewarding. But we had a few bad instances, particularly on the collection side, when we couldn't afford to have all that cash that was ours sitting with somebody else that could actually afford to be paying us on time. And so, we're going through a transitional phase where we're, moving back into this segment though.
Yes. Let's move a little bit in terms of talent, in terms of hiring, in terms of getting the right people on board, right? So how do you typically hire your city directors? And maybe tell us a little bit about the process of launching a new city.
Yeah, so I gleaned a lot of experience from my day actually handing out flyers to the taxi drivers in Hong Kong on this one.
That was useful.
Yeah. And so what we typically do is, we do have an interview process. We actually go by a process from a book called A Method of Hiring. And I think it's important just to have a standard process. I don't believe there's a lot of right process. There's probably one that fits you better, but actually doing it consistently is one way to look for our city directors. But going back to the Hong Kong story, we basically tell these guys, we give them an exercise, and I say, look, I want you to go talk to 5 customers, small business owners, just ask them how they do delivery, and I want you to go talk to 5 delivery drivers. Just go find them in the streets and tell me what you find out. You don't have to tell them you're applying for a job. Just ask them what's going well for them when it comes to delivery and what's not going well. And there's a lot of things you get from that. One, you get their ability to kind of dissect what problems are not important, but also you get a sense of like their character. Because I actually have gone to interview a lot of people that said, well, I'm going to be the city director. That's not my job. And that's the best way to end the interview process with us, because it's actually not important what I think, it's what the customer thinks. And if you're not willing to go out and speak directly to our customers, and our customers are both the business owners, but also drivers are definitely our customers as well, we won't even entertain a second interview. And then the second part of that is one of the characteristics we definitely look for is somebody local. There's we have one exception to this, but people that understand the local dynamic, the local culture in SEA or even China are very, very important. They have to understand like the cultural psychology of that city, particularly again with our driver. We're working with thousands of drivers in this city, and they might not always especially as like somebody like me, I'm from the US, I've lived outside a long time, but I will never understand the psychological aspects of what it means to be a driver in a city if you're not from there. Right, so we really, really look for a core team at the local level that is from there, and oftentimes they've all either come from a similar industry, or they've also been educated abroad too, because we want people that both can like narrow in on the local thing, but they need to understand like more global, regional context, and so that's really a killer combination for us.
And what are some of the main challenges that you face when it comes to finding the right talent, right? Because also, with hiring, growing, it's getting harder and harder, right? In expensive growth phase.
Yeah, I would say now for us, it's actually distinguishing between people that just want to jump on the ride versus builder, right? And so we, it's very, startups are kind of in a lot of ways right now. Following funding news is interesting for people. And so consequently, you do get a lot of inbound interest right now because you're doing a lot of new innovative things, which is a great thing to bring in talent. But actually being able to distinguish between the people that just want to be along for that ride versus the ones that want to build and make it happen is not always easy during the hiring phase, because a lot of it is the validation of their past experience, how they look and solve problems. But we do a lot of reference checks as well.
And I know that the 4 values of the company are passion, grit, humility, and execution, right? How do you tell the story of the company culture to the outside world? How do you build an interesting brand as an employer?
Yeah, so for me, it really starts with those 4 values. And the second piece of that is being authentic about them. And so, we hire, we reward, and sometimes we fire based on those values. So when we think about employer branding, for us, it's about being transparent about those, because we actually very strongly believe that that's been a big contributor to our success as we've grown. And the reason we believe this is actually because when you operate across so many different countries and so many different cultures, and even in Hong Kong where our headquarters is, I think we have like 15 to 20 different nationalities. It would be very easy to say, oh, it's different in this country, or somebody else does this in a different way, and it's not a good way, or you wouldn't understand, you're not from here. But actually our value system gives us a common language by which to relate to each other that actually transcends kind of the surface level attributes of each one of us. So when we go back to employer branding, I think it's being authentic that we're proud of these values, and sharing the challenges that the job will definitely entail. I mean, it's people think, oh, you're really well funded, and it's going to be this like Google, Facebook experience, you're in tech and all of this. The truth is, a lot of it's still very messy. And you either love that because it's a challenge, and in that challenge you find ways to grow personally, or you say this company doesn't have it together. It's the same situation, but it's actually how the person interprets that. And again, by giving them the lens of who the people are they're working with, and like how we approach these types of challenges, really goes a long way during the interview process to letting people assess whether we are the right fit for them.
Yes. And interesting that you put there also humility. Yeah. That's an interesting one, right? I mean, I understand passion, grit, execution, I understand. Yeah. But humility, why did you put humility?
Yeah, so there's actually, humility has three meanings for us. And it's actually, if we do let people go, it's typically because of this, not the other ones. And so this is why it's maybe the most important for us. So the three things humility means for us is what you would expect, putting the team before yourself. But because we believe to build this market, we rely on everybody, right? Our drivers, our users, and our teammates, right? So you definitely have to have a team first mentality. The second part of humility is having a mindset for continuous learning. You never want somebody who thinks that they've already hit their pinnacle, because the company is going to keep growing. Their job's going to keep changing. So if they already think that they're their pinnacle and can't grow anymore, their job is going to outgrow them. And then the third one that I found the most interesting early on when we talk about humility is we say we don't want people that recreate the wheel. And why this is really important is when you're growing and you hire really, really smart people think that you hire them to solve problems in an innovative way. But you know what? There's certain problems we've solved, or there's certain problems other people have already solved, right? So we use the example of login. Facebook and Google know how to do login on something. Like, we don't need to come up with a new way to do login. So that we have to convince these really smart people that they don't need to solve things that have already been solved, but put their energy into the hard things that haven't been solved. But that's very, very counterintuitive sometimes when you hire exceptional people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, don't walk on your hands if you can walk on your feet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Much more succinct.
And I heard that you make your new employees build their chairs. What's the story behind that?
So it is true that we make our new employees actually build their chairs. And where this came from was after we launched for about 15 months, we were in like an old industrial building in Hong Kong. We had just moved into the new office. This was the new office, but it was still not very nice. And we bought chairs and, whatever chairs to sit on. But we have a lot of engineers who sit a long time and do a lot of coding. And a lot of people were complaining that like their chairs were causing problems. But we didn't have any money to go buy new chairs. And also we're in a business that is about efficiency. So actually like throwing away perfectly good chairs for new chairs doesn't like really fit with who we are. And so we couldn't afford to buy 50 new chairs at that time. So what we did for the next 12 months is we had a monthly town hall, and we would raffle off 5 new chairs every single month because that's what we could afford. And so through that process, we took something from people complaining about, oh, my chair doesn't work, to being something where people were really excited to get their name drawn out of a bag. But there were conditions to it, is that if you didn't pick up your chair, because it was in a box, I'm sure we're ordering the same chair still, and I think they're still from Taobao. They're better than the old ones, but people actually had to put them together with 2 days, or the name went like back into the bucket and it would get redrawn. So people were really obsessive about their chairs. And it really is close to our heart. 1, because we believe in building a sustainable business. 2, we believe in not wasting resources and actually making resources more efficient. And 3, it's to remind us that this is a long journey, and you come from very humble beginnings where things aren't perfect, but you can turn these challenges into exciting opportunities if you just let your mind go there. And so people now, we across China and Southeast Asia, we have 3,700 employees now. And so it would be very easy to look at the headlines of the funding to say, they're across all these cities, they have all this money, but we don't want to lose the things that made us successful in the early days. And the chair is like a good reminder of the journey of where we've come, but the journey that we still have to take.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I was just yesterday, I was talking to a very successful entrepreneur from Myanmar, and he started many years ago in the manufacturing business of food manufacturing. And at that time when he started it, he basically had to take a loan, and he basically mortgaged his house and everything, and he still had enough money only for half of the factory. So half of the factory was built in iron and all the normal materials, and half of it was built of wood, because he couldn't afford it anymore. And now, many years later, he turned into a very, very successful businessman. But he keeps that factory as it was, because he wants that to be a reminder. Look, we started there. We are now here, but let's not forget where we started, right? Because it's so many people that can fall into complacency.
Yes, and I think it goes back to the point I was making. There's do you want people that are along for the ride, or do you want builders? And we're still building. So I think little things like this are symbolic reinforcements of the type of people that we want to join us on this journey.
Final question. What would be an advice that you would want to share with somebody just graduating and wanting maybe to start a career, to get into startup or whatever? What would you advise?
Sure. So I've got 3 points on this, actually. The first is, you don't realize this till you're out of school, but up until you graduate, your entire life is prescribed for you. Right? The schools, you go to school, and then you go to university, and you go through things, but all of that, probably your parents or other people have kind of put you on this path. And then you get out of school and the path is open, or at least it should be, right, at this point. And so you really have to think hard about that transition to growing up is really about going from other people telling you what you need to be doing to figuring out what you need to be doing on a daily basis. Because no longer are people going to pat you on the back for getting a good grade. They're paying you to do a job. So don't expect a pat on the back anymore just for doing what you're getting paid to do. And I think that's a really hard realization for people graduating. The second part that I believe very strong in is the idea of self-authorship. So really creating your own story, right? Again, I think this goes back to everything being prescribed for you. You don't realize that all of the influences up until this point in your life have really informed your personal perspective on things. But you have to really self-reflect and say, is that my perspective? Does that align with my personal value system anymore? Right? Just because you thought you should go into tech, or you thought you should be a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever the job is that you thought you should after you graduate, is that really who you are? And so I really encourage people to try to do some self-reflection and see if what they're doing really aligns to who they want to be. because it's very easy to go on a path that's more driven by like what you see in society. It's not even your family, right? Like, it's just go make money, go do this. And pretty soon you start following a path and you don't even know anymore if that's your path or someone else's path. So self-authorship is super important concept for me personally, and I think I wish somebody told me that much earlier in my life. And then the last one, I have a secret to get a job almost 100% of time for self-graduates, that I would hire this person every single time if they came into an interview, if they were a fresh grad, is if they came in and said, look, I've used your service several times. I went and I talked to your customers. And for us, I went and talked to 5 drivers. I went and I talked to 5 small businesses. And this is what they say about your business. And this is how I think you can improve. I would give this person a job every single time, because normally they're just waiting, for, the interviewer to give them a question, and then they can answer it. Oh, I did this in school or that in school and blah, blah. No, just tell me about my business and prove that you're proactive about caring what my customers care about, and I will hire you.
Mm-hmm. Super.
Yeah.
So guys, you heard that. So if you want to get a job in Lalamove, you know what you need to do. Blake, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for the sharing. Thanks for being with us today, and good luck in the future growth of Lalamove.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to follow us on radopalamario.com/podcast for all the show notes, links, and extra tips covered in the interview. Make sure also to subscribe to our emailing list to get the news in the nick of time. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes or Stitcher and you like what we do, please kindly review and give us 5 stars so we can keep the energy flowing and get more people to find out about our podcast. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me to stay tuned for our latest articles as well as future guests for the podcast. And if you have any suggestions or any other idea, please feel free to write to me. I respond to all. And also, please make sure not to miss our next episode, where we will be having a few other C-level and top leaders in supply chain joining us. Stay tuned.